Welcome everyone. I'm just going to say we're going to wait a couple of minutes to leave time for people to join us from their previous meetings. So.
Hello.
Actually, while we're waiting to start, it would be really nice if people could just put a quick intro to themselves in the chat, just a quick hello and tell us who you are or where you're based or something like that. That would be really nice to see. Thanks. Okay, thank you. So welcome everybody. We'll get started. My name's Simon Abram and I'm the director of Durham Energy Institute, and it's my pleasure today to introduce this DEI seminar. And our speaker today is Jessica Symons, who's director of Visioning Lab. She's an anthropologist and a creative digital consultant, and she's got many years of experience across all sectors really as a researcher and a consultant in everything from large multinationals to SMEs and startups. So I'm very excited about this. So Jessica will speak for about half an hour maybe, and then we'll invite questions, and you're welcome to, if you've got any queries or anything you don't understand as she's introducing the concept, please do raise a hand. Feel free to put questions in the chat, and we'll take verbal questions at the end as well. And if you would like to put a quick note in the chat, just introducing herself, that will be really welcome. So I'm going to ask Jessica to just quickly introduce herself and then jump into the seminar. Thank you.
Okay, hello, thanks Simone. Thanks for inviting me here. I'm actually going to put my LinkedIn into the message, into the chat, because there's issues with my website at the moment. So if you want to get in touch with me, please get in touch with me there. So I wanted to, I'm going to start actually with the conclusion of this talk, and then I'm going to take you on a journey through how I came to it. So the conclusion and the sort of proposal that I'm making here is to think about the elements, so fire, earth, air, and water, as a way of conceptualizing energy. I won't go into that now. This is where I'm heading to. Is that argument, and this is relating to in this talk. What I'm going to do is take you through that journey, through the development of a product, and generative AI product for my company Visioning Lab, and using that product to make a series of glossaries for different sectors. So starting with the Metaverse Standards Forum, so making a Metaverse glossary, and then one for the energy sector. And then in the process of making one for the energy sector, really starting to think about conceptually how we understand not just the energy sector, but also our society, and how we can relate conceptual understandings to the underlying infrastructure of digital and data solutions, and how they can support systems that support our infrastructure. So just my background, I've been on a bit of a journey over the years. The common thread has been working on technology, emerging technology and concepts. I was part of the dot-com boom sort of over 25 years ago. And so I was working in a big IT consultancy in a new technologies team. And those new technologies were the internet, smart cards, mobile phones, portals, e-commerce hubs. So I sort of saw the trajectory that went from these things being new technologies that nobody had ever heard of into becoming embedded into part of our daily lives. And that interest in emerging sort of has sustained throughout my working life. And so most recently, I've been working on immersive, so augmented and virtual reality, digital twins, and then AI as continuing with this sort of thread of emerging technologies and how they have a transformative effect on society. So the three main areas that I'm working on with Visioning Lab is Ontology Maker, which is what I'm going to focus on in this discussion, and also creating 3D virtual environments for universities and festivals and other different contexts. So collaboration spaces as 3D virtual environments, and also augmented reality experiences, which I spent the first 3 years of developing my company was actually making an app, an augmented reality app for phones where you could hover it over images and it would pop up digital assets. So this sort of this convergence of the metaverse as a series of 3D virtual environments is something that I've spent a lot of time thinking about. And then AI has come in as an additional technology, which it seemed important to try and make sense of because it was becoming part of our daily lives. And obviously, since then, we've really started to see how AI is just changing everything. So what is Ontology Maker? So the point of Ontology Maker was I wanted to tackle, or the tool is designed to tackle miscommunication that happens at multiple stages of a project or team collaboration. There's a tendency to focus just on the solutions themselves, so the data and digital infrastructure in the delivery of a project. But actually language is critical in every stage of a project's development. And having and miscommunication is a common problem as people move from writing a bid or a proposal to do a project through to negotiating it and agreeing it in sort of legal documents to the development of that project into something which is to be delivered, and then supporting it afterwards. So the language that's used in the describing of that project can change a lot as it goes around it, and that causes miscommunication. And in particular, there's a challenge around the data itself. So if you've got a series of data systems that you use to capture information about a project, those data systems will vary across the different stages. And again, the language that describes them won't necessarily connect or integrate. And so the Ontology Maker tool was designed to produce glossaries rapidly in order to support people to communicate across these different parts of their business. So a lot of technical solutions and ontologies in particular are being created really focused in on the data analysis stage. And I was interested more in sort of opening that up to the whole process of communication across projects and teams. And actually, one of the reasons why I did this was because I wanted non-technical people to understand how important it is to synchronize the words that you use when you communicate with each other. That's something that's understood very well in the technical community. Anybody who's written a software program that tries to pull in different pieces of data from different data sets will have a very good understanding of the fact that how data is described in one data set is different from how data is described in the other data set. And if you try and integrate them together, then you have to do a lot of mediating work to synchronize them. So that's understood very well in the technical community. It's not understood so well in the other stages of a project. And so part of the reason why I'm advocating for using shared vocabularies and the development of glossaries is to raise awareness amongst decision makers in other parts of that cycle of how important it is for data to be synchronized at the development stage. So the Ontology Maker as a solution is sort of, still in the early stages, but the proposition is we come to your project or team, we identify your existing ways of communicating, relevant project information, industry standards in your sector, existing ontologies, and we run this material through the Ontology Maker process. And crucially, it can make multilingual glossaries connected to each other using an indexed ID. So it allows you to not only synchronize your language, the language, the vocabulary that you use in your chosen language, say English, but you can also synchronize it with project partners that you have who use different languages. So here's a sort of visualization of this process. So you take any relevant documents, you run it through this process, which is a sort of Ontology Maker process, which produces a glossary, and then from that you can then produce multiple languages. And just to clarify here, between a glossary and ontology, the term Ontology Maker, again, because I want to communicate this to non-technical people and the importance of using a shared vocabulary at every stage of a project lifecycle, I've started with using the word glossary to describe what it is that we're trying to do here, which is create a set of terms and definitions. And ontology is where you start to describe the relationships between those terms and actually set up hierarchies and relationships that describe how those terms are connected to each other. So using a car as an analogy, a glossary would have, say, it would have the term car and its meaning. It would have engine, wheels, brakes, steering wheel, etc. And ontology puts those terms into groups. So, for example, you have a car, and there you have car parts, and then you have the relationships between those groups. So a car has car parts, a car has safety parts. The engine is connected to the wheels are connected to the brakes, etc. So you create hierarchy of relationships and you create groups in an ontology. This will be relevant later on. So the first step in the development of this Ontology Maker tool was, because my background has been working in immersive and 3D virtual environments, one of the challenges that I was facing was people didn't actually understand what was meant by 3D virtual environments. When Facebook renamed themselves as Meta and then came out with this term metaverse, that was actually very useful for those of us who'd been working in the immersive 3D, AR, VR, digital twin, cyber physical infrastructure community, because XR, all these different terms that were being used, it was very confusing for others who didn't understand even the first term, let alone all the other terms. So a big sort of motivator for me in the creation of this glossary production process was because I wanted to help people understand better what a metaverse is. And this is the sort of slide that I show people quite regularly when I'm trying to explain what the metaverse is. If you think of it as a series of connecting 3D virtual environments, and if you allow for that definition, then you can bring in 3D game environments, you can bring in the built environments of CAD produced digital twins and products, you can bring in spatial computing, robotics, automated cars, as well as the augmented and virtual reality, which is really where most people think the metaverse is. But the production process of these virtual environments is the same, which is that you're creating an X, Y, and Z axis to produce a virtual world that entities can move within and have data associated with them. So I started working on this glossary and using AI to produce the glossary because I wanted to be able to communicate with people across these different fields about what we all mean when we talk about virtual environments. And through this activity, I started working with the Metaverse Standards Forum, which is an international network which brings together organizations who are collaborating on the standards relating to the development of the metaverse. And I came to them with the glossary that I created through this AI process. And they've been working on a glossary for 2 years and trying to produce it from the ground up and really struggling to get consensus around terms. And through the Ontology Maker process, I'd made 160 terms very quickly using generative AI, using ChatGPT, and translated them into Korean, Chinese, Arabic, Vietnamese, German, a whole load of other languages, and all connected. As you can see here, these numbers allow you to connect those different terms together and their definitions. So you have this continuous line that runs through all your different languages working with your terms. So this has now been adopted by the set of terms I provided was adopted by the Metaverse Standards Forum and has been put out for community consultation to discuss, do we want to use these terms? And then the next step is to work towards an ontology where we start to define the relationships between those different terms. So this is an ongoing process. I'm now sort of chair of various sort of parts of the Metaverse Standards Forum, and we're working through this process. And so now I get to energy. So in the case of, in the course of going around talking to people, I started attending a data sharing infrastructure network meeting that's run by Connected Places in London. They have an online meeting every week where people get together to discuss the synchronization of data across different government services. There are a lot of energy people who were on that call, and it struck me that there was a similar problem within the design of energy systems, that this use of terminology across different projects and teams was starting to cause a significant problem for the synchronization of systems, because they weren't coming together neatly. There was sort of confusion about the different systems and how to connect them. And also, I was thinking also more conceptually when you think about the metaverse and what it's helping us do, is that idea of a series of connected virtual environments is helping us bring together what might initially seem as quite disparate sectors into a sort of conceptualization of the virtual realm as this alternative world that sits alongside us, that we can move in and out of and move through. And it got me thinking about how you might think about energy flows within a country. So how does energy come in and move through a country, and what systems are in place to facilitate and support that, and to what extent could a bigger conceptualization of an energy's infrastructure help reconcile these different systems? And also, actually, in conversation with a number of energy experts and stakeholders, it seemed like there isn't that conceptualization of energy at a country level, which facilitates the connection of different systems, and also the use of particular terms. And so I thought, well, why don't I see if I can have a go? And I was particularly motivated to do it because I was working with partners in other countries, particularly in South Korea. And I saw potentially an opportunity where if the UK can come up with a conceptualization of how energy moves through the country in the UK, and having an understanding of how the systems sit off that and how the data moves through it, then that could be an expertise and a competence that we could export. So I was sort of interested in that as well. So then I started going through the Ontology Maker process. One of the first things that you do is identify who are the organizations who are producing material that becomes the source material for the production of an ontology. And so here's a set of organizations who sort of seem relevant. And so I went through the making process to produce. I was invited to South Korea to discuss this Ontology Maker process in relation to energy, and in doing research around the particular challenges in for Korean. It was automotive battery companies in particular were attending this conference. I noticed that the European Commission have produced a digital passport requirement now for all countries to for their automated batteries to have a digital passport. So what I did was I produced a glossary which took the terms that were being used from the European directives around the digital passport, and I brought it into the development of an energy glossary specifically focused on batteries, and then took it to this conference and shared it with people. And here's a Korean version and the sort of German version. But the thing that I kept returning to was this idea of a bigger conceptual frame. So you can narrow in very closely in something like, okay, a digital passport for an automated battery, and what are the terms that we use for that? But still, do we have this sort of big picture that we can use, that we hang something like that off? And that's where I sort of came to this idea of the elements. Now, obviously, the elements is an ancient way of thinking about the constitution of our planet: earth, air, fire, and water. And actually, in Japanese culture, there's also the idea of the void as well, which is a fifth way, which is the state of nothingness. I think it's quite an interesting one, but I didn't incorporate it into this. So I started really working with this as a concept. So now we get back to the slide that I started with, which is, okay, if we look at the energy sort of flows and energy activity in our country, if we separate it out into these different elements of earth, air, fire, and water, then is that helpful to us? Does it allow us to kind of find a way into the different ways that people are producing and using energy that also works with the structure of our existing systems, how our different sectors are organized, so it's coherent still to connect out into the systems, but is also in some way conceptually a good way for people to work. So then I started looking at, okay, what other ways can we structure our information under these categories? So I looked at the countries that are producing energies and to the extent to which they could be structured into this earth, air, fire, and water. So we have countries that are making coal going into earth, countries that are working with oil going into fire, And then we've got wind for air and hydro for water. So this fairly easy distinction started occurring for how you could draw them out into different groups. And then, so that's countries, and then you can do the same with companies, like what kinds of energy production processes they have and the way that that can pull out into these different elements. And then, so that was at an international level, and then you can sort of bring your scale down to a national level. And again, you can sort of see how the different companies in the country separate out into these different categories. And then sort of taking a step back and saying, okay, well, how about the actual production processes and whether or not they too can fit into this structure. So looking at, for example, with wind, how the capture, transmission, storage, distribution, and consumption of energy using wind structures out into the different infrastructure and systems and processes, and similarly how you can do that with hydro. Now, as I said before, an ontology is actually about defining relationships between these things, between different entities, and creating hierarchies, and that's often represented as something called a knowledge graph in the sort of software development or technical community. And so that knowledge graph is used by systems as a reference point to connect different data sets together. And so I'm sort of looking at how this would structure out into a knowledge graph as well. So what then is the value of doing something like this? Well, as I say, you can work at different scales. So you can work all the way internationally down to sort of country and region. You can accommodate whether or not you're thinking about countries themselves or thinking about companies or processes. One of the biggest challenges that I've found in the sort of metaverse space is that non-specialists, decision makers, struggle to conceptualize what it is that we're talking about, and actually using this fairly kind of simple and historical understanding of the elements actually facilitates understanding amongst non-decision makers and, of course, the general public. And really interestingly, you've got earth and fire as elements that represent the fossil fuels, and then you've got air and water, which represent the renewables. So I think there's like a sort of potentially an interesting shift that you can make where you can communicate the need to reduce these sort of combustible energy production processes with the renewable ones of air and water. So just sort of to finish off, to sort of reflect on also the relationship between using the sort of metaverse ontologies and glossaries as a way of helping people understand the virtual realm. Actually, that overarching concept really helped. It really helped bring, or is helping to bring together these disparate groups, and it provides a rallying point. There is obviously contention around the use of the term metaverse. A lot of people don't like it because it's so closely associated with meta. But I think that will fade out after a while, and same with it. Lots of people disputed what the internet would be called when it first came out, and then after a while everyone just started calling it the internet. So there's standards groups that are involved, and so we're sort of working towards this sort of virtual realm. Energy, on the other hand, doesn't have this overarching concept, and it's potentially actually getting in the way of this reconciliation of the different systems and the integration of infrastructure. Particularly when it comes to government leadership. Historically, there's been a tendency for large companies in charge of infrastructure to refuse to share with each other for IP reasons. And this is ongoing, but the government needs to become stronger about insisting that that private sector delivery of infrastructure requirements conforms to an overarching vision that the government has for how it wants its services to be delivered. And so using energy as an example, if the government defines its own conceptual understanding of how it wants energy to work, and which goes right down into design of systems, standards around data, and an interconnecting glossary / ontology, that it requires companies to adapt to, then you gain a lot more control over the process. So this then so just taking us sort of finally through the arc of the language, the emphasis on language is so you have your concepts, like for example metaverse, and then you have your language, which are the terms that you use within it, and you need to make them work together to help people understand. If people don't understand what you're talking about, then they don't engage. And we're in a situation, certainly in the metaverse context, where a lot of decision makers don't really understand technology. And the more important that technology becomes to the delivery of our society, of our lives, the more important it becomes to facilitate understanding. And that actually people who do understand, for example, data analysts understand, or digital consultants understand technology, but they don't necessarily agree on how to explain it or know how to explain it to people who don't understand. So I'm arguing for having a clear relationship between some conceptual framings and then the development of systems. And just to come back around to the purpose of what energy is, or the development of energy systems, and where we're moving with energy at the moment, is the use of net zero as a term. And this is something that I'm very keen to move on to next in terms of glossaries, is to what extent is net zero, climate, carbon, and all these terms getting in the way of the development of a net zero infrastructure, which of course is very closely related to energy. So in summary, the thing I've been wrestling with is how do we conceptualize energy to support the integration of energy systems and widened infrastructure, and it would be good to talk to people about their opinions on this. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jessica. It's extremely thought-provoking. A few years ago, some of us were involved in a National Centre for Energy Systems Integration, and this was very much an issue that was a problem. And I did make a not very successful attempt to get people to develop a glossary, because it was clear that not only were people using different terms for the same things, they were using the same terms for different things, and it did get very confusing. So I think I was with you up to the point where you got to the elemental model. I'm curious about a number of things. One is why your focus on generation.
Generation of energy.
Yeah. Rather than other approaches to what energy is or what it can be.
Well, I suppose it's because that's where it starts, in my view. And if we're looking at how energy flows through a country, it's where the capture of energy. I suppose you've got capture and production, right? But so you've got the capture of energy, and so for me, there's the conceptual understanding. If we want to engage, particularly decision makers, to think about policy in relation to energy, then having an understanding of that journey that energy takes from the moment where it's taken in and then its entry through the different energy systems to it then getting to the places where it's needed. It seemed to me like that was the most logical place to start. But I'm interested, where would you start?
I guess my question is about the fact that it's a kind of I guess a sort of industry standard, which is to divide production and consumption of energy, and is really quite an arbitrary division. Because what we're talking about generally is energy conversion, isn't it, in different ways. So I guess that if your focus is on energy generation, you're missing a lot of the social issues, which as an anthropologist you'll be very focused on, because they tend to be in another area of focus. So it's quite industry oriented to take this sort of approach. I think it's interesting. I was just wondering why you'd taken that approach.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that my idea of the sort of the people element is again how, because we need to take the people with us, right? That's the whole point of net zero, is that our dependence on fossil fuels is so integrated into our daily lives, that I'm thinking not just about industry, but about how people, when they walk out of the house and they get into their car and they drive, what's going through their minds as they're sort of, burning petrol and pumping it out into the atmosphere, and how that compares to the process of plugging their car in to a grid, and charging their car and taking the energy from and the sort of that awareness of the production process of the energy being from a renewable source, whether or not, let's say that's a hydro, and so it's thinking about, obviously when people get in their car and drive away, they think about their shopping, right? They're not thinking about their car, but it's like in the background somewhere there's this idea of what it is that they're doing when they're using energy, and the extent to which we can present a conceptual understanding which is quite simple, which they can then connect to. And I think we're nearly there. But being very interested talking to people in China actually about the extent of the use of EVs in China is particularly as people are buying cars for the first time, they're buying an electric vehicle. So conceptually for them, they're engaging with electricity as a sort of primary way in which they move around. Whether or not that electricity is being produced sustainably is another question, right? But it's these kinds of ways that people are understanding their use of energy is actually at the heart of what I'm thinking about, rather than it being a sort of company or industry focus.
Okay, let's open to other questions. Barry, you've put some comments in the chat which are interesting. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, please. This is really, really very, very interesting for me, in that I've seemed to have developed a sort of parallel process on a much more informal basis to kind of delve into the realities, both in terms of what's in people's heads, but also what's kind of, in the physics and the world. So it's fascinating for me. As I mentioned in the chat, my kind of work around energy transformation which is sort of partly about the Green Streets project, which we've kind of done physically with real things happening on the street here, is kind of extending into trying to frame and reframe the way that we collectively might think about this. And I've, just put a response into the DESNES committee, the parliamentary committee's consultation call, which, end of Monday, so it's fresh in my mind, really trying to wrestle the local versus centralized. I believe we're so used to thinking of energy as something that is produced centrally and flows outwards, producers, consumers, and so on, that it's really difficult for policymakers, regulators, and so on to kind of break out of that. So that's kind of one dimension, and the other one is the other thing I think is interesting and of course these can be multidimensional, I think, can't they? And that's your consumptive production. I use production for both. Tend to use generation for stuff where you burn something, and capture for renewables, capture energy rather than generate it from burning stuff. So but local and regional versus central, I think, is a really important lens that needs help becoming more established, particularly by local energy planners and so on. And I think it's really helpful to think of energy as that which is produced. What was the word? There were two C's, weren't there? Consumptively in fossil fuels and so on, or via capture. I'd love to have your thoughts on that as well.
Yeah, I mean, as you're saying, a lot of this is about bringing the people with you, isn't it? And a lot, to the extent to which people think about energy at all, and then think about it in relation to whether or not it's an ethical decision and whether or not they care about that, and then the cost of it and how important it is to have energy that it might cost more, but it's more ethical, and how to compare all those priorities together and make a decision, and then even to understand at all, as you've said, these different terms that are used to describe all these different processes. And I think my impression, talking about, from my ethnographic work as an anthropologist, is that a lot of people in the UK, because my research is in low-income communities in Manchester, primarily, Manchester, Salford, Cheshire, and in the creative digital sector, is that people expect the government to just take care of things. They don't want to have to get involved in this in the kind of complexities of the decision making, and so. I mean, after a while in doing this, the thing that I started thinking about was, is this really, is what I'm promoting actually a branding exercise? That actually what we need is a brand for energy that is simple and clear, that gets people behind air and water as your primary energy production process, and sees fire and earth as a sort of old practice that we shouldn't do anymore.
Yeah.
And we sort of, and then the government takes care of it.
Yeah. I'd say a couple of things in response. One is that my premise here is that the moral dilemma should go away and will in time anyway go away, but we should accelerate that. And what I mean by that is that green energy is the cheapest by far. And the fact that we expect to pay more for it, people are happy to play along with for as long as we're happy to go along with it. So, and I also, from my technology background, I see huge opportunities to reverse that in various ways, not least by helping people to become prosumers rather than just consumers, and virtual solar farms and virtual wind farms and so on. So that's kind of, fundamental to my thinking from an economic and point of view, and as a technologist with a long history in terms of transformation. And it doesn't quite meet your point. I absolutely get in terms of the economics of energy and the growing number of people who are in the precariat, as Guy Standing helpfully calls it, and poverty more blatantly. But I think one of the functions of government should be to enable them to benefit as well, us all to benefit. And in terms of people receding from thinking about this or being involved in this, I think we need a resurgence of citizenship where people are actively encouraged, not necessarily to get involved in the technicalities. I think it's up to us, the kind of people who are in this room, to kind of help make the choices and so on relatable.
I think
I'm just going to ask if anyone else would like to pitch into this conversation as we're going on, maybe with comments on this or other questions that you'd like to pose to Jessica. Because I know you sort of mentioned AI in passing, and I think maybe some of the people involved today might be interested in knowing a bit more, perhaps. Nelly, would you like to say something? I noticed you've...
Yeah, I just put my video there. I'm not sure if
Thanks.
it's on. I have been here quite listening, and thank you very much. Very good presentation. Thank you, Simone, for bringing such a great guest. I'm just wondering here is how this so much resonates. By the way, I am in computer science. I work with AI, but I am more on the software engineering side, requirements engineering side. So I know about AI, but I am also interested in working with developing what I call socio-technical systems. So it's not just about AI, it's about understanding the stakeholders' requirements and how together we can design a system that is not just the AI people, is everybody together. We should work together and co-design the decision-making there. So from that point of view, Jessica, your presentation was great. So my question is more about, have you got opportunities to talk with other people about how your experience can be ported to other experiences that is not just about energy? For example, in my case, I'm working with the NHS, decision-making under uncertainty. And people would say, oh, how is this brought up by Nelly in terms of energy here? We are talking about energy. But the thing is that at the very high top level, I am facing the same problems of the ontologies and the definitions that the GP has in her mind when she talks about, it's a real she, by the way, she talks about the illnesses that we are talking about. And in the end is the idea that these ontologies are needed. So I'm just wondering, Jessica, if people have come up with with this same question, perhaps at how we can extrapolate from your experience onto other kind of domains, because in the end, a lot is going to be the same, at least from my point of view.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I suppose in some way that was my sort of point of showing why the metaverse really is the kind of my starting point, and then moving into energy. And then since then, I've been working on water, and disaster actually. And so I'm doing a project with Manchester University at the moment where we're looking at the language of disaster, but also how the built environment, so architecture, we're working with a professor in architecture to see how the language of temporary settlements, temporary architecture, so peacetime architecture, like sort of events and festivals and pop-up structures, how the language of that can potentially be reconciled with the language of disasters, so earthquakes, floods, disaster response in particular. So you've got that first stage of going into to tackle the disaster and dealing with the sort of messed up infrastructure, and then you've got the rebuilding phase as well, and the sort of the language around that and how much it's different and how much it's similar. And so mid-process for doing that, and from a health perspective, there's as you probably know, there's so many existing ontologies around health, to do with the body, describing body, but also then describing illnesses and the treatments and now that's definitely a wood for the trees scenario. There's so many trees of all these different terms that, can we see the wood? And that's exactly my point, is the conceptualization of the body. And there's a lot of work in anthropology, in particular, actually, around sort of how we represent and conceptualize the body in sort of health context, and how and where the lessons could come from that. And it does feel like we're in this kind of convergence phase at the moment, which is being pushed by the development of systems, and particularly the integration of systems, that where all these sort of what felt like esoteric discussions and philosophical discussions about who we are and why we're here, and all that work that has been done sort of, by social scientists and humanists over the past sort of centuries, we're bringing into the development of IT systems, and that's really the maturity now of these systems, is that we can integrate them into these concepts. But the first step is to decide which concepts we want to use. That's and it's going to be up to us, I think, to some extent, to decide that, because we're the ones who know about them. And what I don't know, a lot of technical people, they don't really want to have discussions about big picture stuff. They just want to know, okay, what shall I call this column name?
Jessica, these are the people who usually work in AI, and that is the reason why is my other here for software engineering. That is my real background applied to decision making under uncertainty. My research is that it is not the duty of a developer to decide on the decision making. Is for them to do what is codified by a set of stakeholders. That is very important. So another question I have, and thank you very much, because it was a comment more than a question that I made, is that I see that the ontologies here are used, and the way how I interpreted your experience is that they are used for supporting understanding of different stakeholders. But also, from the point of view of a computer science person, we know that it is essential for automation. Because if you want to automate many things, we would need to have those ontologies. something that it might be outside the topic here, but something that I'm wondering here, perhaps I missed it in the first 5 minutes because I entered a bit late, is policy making. And that brings something there to all the stakeholders. It's not automation, it's policy making. What is your experience with respect to that in terms of using these ontologies or this discussion for policy making support?
Yeah, I mean, so as I sort of said, I'm in a circle which is the data sharing initiative, which is a network of people that's led by the Connected Places team, which is an informal group of people who come together from across the different sectors, government people primarily, actually, mainly government people, which is the reason why I keep going, because I'm interested in how government people are approaching this. And it's one of those challenges, as we all know, which is everybody has their job and their realm, and they don't have the authority to go beyond that. So we're all parts of this big system, and nobody can quite work out where something like a conceptual understanding sits in terms of who is the individual and what is the job role that they have that will direct a conceptualization. And this is the reason why I'm so passionate about this, is because I'm seeing the development of systems, multi-million-pound systems that are being produced from the ground up without that conceptual vision of what it is that we need. And so even within IT, you have the product owner, right, or the product manager, and that's somebody who represents an understanding of what the purpose of the system is, and how it should be produced, and they're supposed to hold that vision. So we need a kind of product owner for our society, like and the sort of functions of the society in terms of what's our purpose, what's our goal, but then how does that then relate to all the systems that sit underneath it, at each of those different scales. I'm conscious we've got 3 minutes left. So
yeah, I was going to say you won't be the only one who's got a meeting at 1 o'clock. So I'm just going to say thank you, Jessica. That's been extremely thought-provoking and very, very interesting indeed. We really look forward to keeping up to date with you on how it progresses. So
yeah.
Thank you for joining us. And I hope you'll come to Durham in person soon, and we'll be able to have a proper cup of coffee and a sit down and a chat with people who are interested.